Hello and welcome back everyone. In this video, this is going to be the fourth part in a series of 4 videos where we're going to be covering everything you need to know for paper 1 for Edexcel's A-Level Politics. And specifically today, we're going to be covering the topic of voting behaviour and the media. So quickly looking at the specification, this is going to be everything we're going to be covering today. So feel free to pause the video if you'd like to make note of this. So jumping straight in, we're going to be looking at 3 case studies of recent elections. That's point 4.1 in the specification. But firstly, let's look at some key factors explaining the outcomes of elections. Firstly, class and social status and class de-alignment. Up until the early 1970s, voting behaviour was strongly influenced by class and social status. The majority of the working class voted for the Labour Party, which was strongly associated with the trade union movements and traditional blue-collar industries such as coal, steel and textiles. The majority of the upper and middle classes voted for the Conservative Party, including white-collar workers, including non-manual workers, business people and property owners. Class voting was strongly influenced by self-interest, with each party defined by protecting and representing different classes. That said, it was never so clear-cut, as the Tories always had a selection of deferential, patriotic working class support, and Labour had some middle class support, especially those who worked within the state sector. Since the 1970s, a process known as class de-alignment has occurred, where class began to lose its importance as a determinant of voting behaviour. This was influenced by a changing society and economy, with increased affluence, declining importance of traditional blue-collar industries and less pronounced differences between the classes, and the parties changing their policies to try to appeal to all classes so that they could win elections. Another key factor is partisanship and partisan de-alignment and apathy. In the post-World War II period, voters had strong affiliations and attachments to political parties, which are part of voters' identities. These attachments have been declining since the 1970s and 80s and have continued to decline well into the 21st century. This is a process known as partisan de-alignment. There are now a lot more swing voters who are comfortable voting for any party and decide each election. In the 21st century especially, significant sectors of the electorate are also apathetic and disaffected by politics, as seen in decreasing turnouts at general elections. So some more key factors, one being age. Today, age is a very key determinant of voting choice in UK elections. In 2017, YouGov called it the new dividing line in British politics. This is partly linked to home ownership. Older voters are much more likely to support Conservative or nowadays Reform UK, whilst younger voters are much more likely to vote Labour or other more left-wing radical parties such as the Greens. Turnout was also much higher among older voters, therefore benefiting the Conservative Party. Voters have always become more conservative as they got older. However, recent research is suggesting that millennials aren't following suit, with which is a big problem for the Conservative Party. And again, another key factor is religion. Traditionally, the Labour heartlands were in the Traditionally, the Labour heartlands were in the north parts of Wales and in Scotland, whilst the Tory heartland were the home counties in the East Midlands. This, however, significantly changed with Blair in 1997. He was able to pick up many middle-class seats, including in the South East and the East Midlands. In the 2024 election, Labour's landslide saw them regaining dominance in Scotland and the North. The Conservatives were wiped out from a number of different parts of the UK, and the remaining 121 seats were almost exclusively rural. And another key factor is class and social status. Today, class is of limited importance as a determinant of voting behaviour. In 2019, 42% of those in the AB category, which is managerial, voted Conservative compared to 78% in 1964, whilst just 34% in the DE category, that is semi and unskilled and unemployed, and also pensioners, voted Labour compared to 64% in 1964. Class wasn't an important determinant in the 2024 election, apart from the fact that those from C2 to DE were more likely to vote Reform than those from the upper and middle classes. And again, yet another key factor is education. In recent elections and referendums, education has also shown itself to be a key dividing line, with those with fewer formal qualifications more likely to support the Conservatives and those with university educations more likely to vote Labour and the Liberal Democrats. In the EU referendum, those without qualifications went 75% for Brexit, whilst those with university degrees went 75% against. There are various explanations for this strong correlation. One key explanation is in relation to values. Those with lower levels of educational attainment are more likely to have authoritarian values and therefore support right-leaning parties, while those with higher levels of education attainment are more likely to have libertarian values and therefore support left-leaning parties. And some other key factors, one being ethnicity. White voters are more likely to vote for the Conservatives, whilst black and minority ethnic voters are more likely to vote Labour. In 2019, 64% of BME voters voted for Labour, while just 20% voted for the Conservatives. In the 2024 election, there was important shifts among Muslim and Jewish voters in particular. In 2024, an estimated 40% of Jewish voters supported Labour, up from 10% in 2019, and 60% of Muslims voted for Labour, down from an estimated 80% in 2019. This is largely due to Labour failing to call for a ceasefire in Gaza for a long time. And another key factor being gender. Women used to be more likely to vote Conservative, but now the influence of gender is marginal. There is more of a difference among the young, though. In 2019, for 18 to 24-year-olds, just 15% of women voted for the Conservatives, but 28% of men did. In 2024, again between 18 and 24-year-olds, 12% of men voted Reform, along with 12% of men voted for the Greens, compared with 6% of women voting Reform and 23% of women voting for the Greens. Next, we're going to look at some long-term issue factors. Firstly, rational choice and issue-based voting. Rational choice theory is the idea that voters behave like consumers by looking for the available options and evaluating which is the most beneficial to them. This is linked to the growth of a more educated electorate, especially with the rise of the internet and the abundance of online information, which includes false information. Economic factors, of course, play an important role in this, while there also being a more rigid theory of economic voting, which suggests that people simply vote out of self-interest for the party that will benefit them economically. This explains why homeowners are much more likely to vote for the Conservatives and those who rent are more likely to vote for Labour. Issue-based voting is similar to rational choice theory in that it suggests voters vote based on policy, but is different in suggesting that voters vote based on which party is closest to them on the policy they deem most important, even if they are not politically aligned with the party's other policies. In the 2019 election, there was a key example of this. 74% of Leave voters voted for the Tories, including many in the Red Wall who have never done so before, whilst 49% of Remain voters voted for Labour. And another long-term issue is valence factors. Valence issues are when there isn't significant disagreement between parties and voters therefore choose based on which party they think is going to be the most effective in government. This became more important in the 2010, 15 and 2019 elections, when there were fewer policy differences between the parties. When valence issues are more significant, social factors are likely to be less significant. Wider political and social contexts. When asked what the greatest challenge was for a Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan said, "Events, my dear boy, events." Events are highly important in influencing the popularity of the government and different parties, and therefore their electoral prospects. These can be political events such as splits within parties or scandals, or wider social and economic developments such as the performance of the economy, key natural disasters, or foreign policy issues. Next, then, we're going to be looking at campaign factors. The 6 weeks before an election is known as the campaign. In this period, parties publish their manifestos and make active efforts on the ground and in the media to win over voters, including spending significant amounts of money on advertising and appearing in television debates and interviews. Many voters only pay attention to politics during election campaigns, and they can therefore be seen as highly important to election results, especially if key events/gaffes happen during them. On the other hand, their importance can be overstated as many voters have already made up their mind and don't make voting choices based on short-term events. And also manifestos. In the run-up to elections, parties also publish manifestos setting out all of their policies in detail and what they're going to do when they are in government. Even though manifestos' promises aren't always carried out, they do give a very good indication of the shape of the party policy and are highly informative. They are also scrutinised heavily on in the media and are highly important in influencing voter choice. On the other hand, polling shows that 2/3 of people actually don't read manifestos, whilst many voters have made their minds up months or years before manifestos are released. And the media. Some arguments the media has a big impact on elections is that parties try to control their media appearance as much as possible during elections, sometimes avoiding tough interviews and having very stage-managed performances and photo opportunities. In 2019, Boris Johnson refused to be interviewed by Andrew Neil, fearing the impact a mishap could have on the campaign. And during elections, most newspapers come out strongly in favour of a political party and effectively campaign for one party. Television debates and interviews are key moments in campaigns and are watched by millions of voters. The media is key to how voters consume political information and form opinions, and can therefore be seen as very important to election outcomes. Key moments during campaigns can go viral on social media and shape voters' perceptions of parties and their leaders, and arguments that the media has very little impact on elections. The impact of the media during elections can be overstated. Voters don't simply follow what the media says but form their own opinions, and also many voters have strong allegiances to parties and are highly likely to be swayed and aren't very likely to be swayed by anything the media says or does during elections. Further, most individuals consume the media and political opinion they already agree with, therefore only reinforcing views rather than having potentially to change them. This is especially true of social media. So the first of the three elections we're going to be looking at is the 1979 general election. Here's just a few graphics to help you understand and get some of the key points and facts about this election. So the election began 18 years of Conservative rule under Thatcher up until 1990, and then John Major until 1997. It was seen as bringing an end to the end of the period of the post-war consensus. It was called after Callaghan's minority Labour government lost a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons, the most recent time this has happened. Labour descended into chaos and infighting over policy and arguably wasn't united again until Blair in 1997. There was a 76% turnout, with Thatcher winning a majority of 43 seats and 43.9% of the popular vote. So, some key factors in determining the outcome of that particular election. Social, economic and political. The political, social and economic context was key to the victory of the Conservatives, who won despite the personal popularity of Callaghan and tentative signs of economic improvement running up into the election. In the early months of 1979, there was the winter of discontent, in which the government's attempts to impose a 5% limit on pay increases collapsed as a series of strikes by lorry drivers, health workers, refuse collectors and even in one local authority, gravediggers. This led to a sense of national paralysis and of Labour incompetence in being unable to control militant trade or unions. The media showed images of miserable strike-bound Britain. The political context was also important. Labour looked weak as the election was triggered by withdrawal of support from nationalist parties after the result of referendums of Scottish and Welsh devolution went against the government. This left the Labour Party with no majority and forced Callaghan to go to the country at the worst possible time for his party. So, social factors. As usual, the Conservative dominated middle and upper classes, whilst also making gains among the working classes for the first time. This suggests a slight decline in the importance of class and social factors, which was down to a number of reasons. Thatcher actively appealed to the working class in her Essex Man strategy, with policies such as the right to buy, council housing, support of small businesses proving very popular. Rational choice and issue voting. Rational choice and issue voting can also be seen to be important to the Conservatives' manifesto of tax cuts and the right to buy scheme, which offered a radical change to voters following the post-war consensus. This being said, Thatcher's policy statement contained very little indication she intended to move her party so far to the right. There was a mention of returning nationalised industries to private hands and removing trade union powers, but no suggestion to go on a radical crusade to scale down the state sector that followed. Both parties gave higher priority to bringing down inflation. So then the campaign itself. The campaign was relatively uneventful. Labour started way behind, and even though they made up a little bit of ground, it was not enough. The Conservatives adopted many techniques of modern advertising under the guidance of professional publicist specialists Gordon Rees and Tim Bell. Thatcher successfully used photo opportunities, including a specifically rather famous picture of her holding a newborn calf. And she presented herself effectively in the media. So just some key points. The wider social, political and economic context was very important here, as was perceived incompetence on part of the Labour government. Leadership played less of a role. Class remained important, but slightly less so than previously. The campaign had little impact on the result, as the Tories started so far ahead, and rational choice and issue voting can also be seen as rather important, as the Conservatives were offering a real change. So next then we're going to look at the 1997 general election. And again, I just have some key graphs here to help illustrate the election itself. So please feel free to pause the video here if you'd like to take note of these. So just a brief overview then. New Labour's landslide victory removed the Conservatives from office for the first time in 18 years and opened the way for 13 years of Labour government. Blair was Prime Minister up until 2007 and he was then replaced by Gordon Brown. The Liberal Democrats also emerged as a significant third force in Westminster. The Conservatives were troubled by ongoing divisions, poor leadership and an inability to appear relevant to contemporary society and struggled to reinvent themselves for another decade until Cameron successfully did so. There was a turnout of 71.3% and Labour won with a huge majority of 179 seats and 43.2% of the general vote. So, again, some of the key factors determining the outcome of this particular election. Firstly, the declining importance of class. Crucial to Labour's victory was their ability to win a significant amount of middle-class voters across the country, including in the Tory heartlands, as well as maintaining the support of the majority of the working classes. They were able to do so because they shifted party policy significantly to the centre and successfully presented themselves as competent. And again, a rational choice in issue voting. As Labour leader, Blair drove towards the policy of modernisation and abandoned old-fashioned party policies such as nationalisation, tax increases and the strengthening of trade union powers, which might have put off some middle-class voters. Blair also gave a reassuringly tough signal on law and order, an issue that mattered to voters after rising crime rates in the early 1990s, and emphasised his links to the business community. Also, his key and rather famous slogan on this point is him saying, "Tough on crime, but tough on the causes of crime." As a sign of the party's desire to show how responsible it was, its 1997 platform stressed specific policy details where it promised to make a difference, such as reducing primary school class sizes and cutting hospital waiting lists. Another of Labour's policies, constitutional reform, gave the party common ground with the Liberal Democrats, which made it easier for Lib Dems to vote tactically for Labour in marginal seats, which their own candidates couldn't hope to win. This may have added up to 30 seats to add to the Labour majority. There was no stark difference between Labour and the Conservatives in terms of actual policy, but the parties had very different images. And then in terms of leadership, Blair was very popular across the country and was seen as a strong, competent and charismatic leader with a clear vision and control over his party. This contrasted heavily with John Major, who was seen as a weak and boring leader presiding over a party divided over Europe and tainted by sleaze and the cash for questions scandal. And then again, perceived competence. Labour couldn't have won on such a large scale without the damage the Conservatives inflicted on themselves after the 1992 election. Perceived economic competence was highly important by 1997 as the economy was recovering from the recession early in the decade, but voters didn't give the Conservatives credit for this. Rather, they remembered the catastrophe of Black Wednesday in September 1992. Given this context, Labour was successful in presenting themselves as an economically competent party, pledging not to increase income tax and to prioritise national finances. And the media? Crucially, Labour won the endorsement of a great part of the press, including the Sun and the Times, who had historically usually always backed the Conservatives. The message was that New Labour was a moderate party with the interests of Middle England at heart. And in terms of social factors, Labour gained among most groups of the population. They gained in most regions, including Scotland, Wales and London, though the Tories kept some of their regional dominance, such as in the home counties. They gained among all classes, especially the middle classes, as they won among white and also BME voters. So just then some key points to summarise here. The ability of New Labour to win the middle classes was very important. I'm sorry, there's just been a typo there. The Conservatives had wrecked their image as the party of economic confidence, and leadership was a very important factor. Labour also benefited from winning the support of significant sections of the press, which normally supported the Conservatives. So next then, we're going to be looking at finally the 2024 general election. And again here, you just have some graphics to help illustrate the election. So again, as mentioned, feel free to pause the video if you'd like to take some notes. So a quick overview then. Rishi Sunak surprised many when he called an election to be held on the 4th of July 2024, with the Conservative Party 20 points behind Labour in the polls, and it was expected that he would wait until later in the year to call an election. As predicted by the polls, the election saw an unprecedented swing from Conservative to Labour, with a Tory landslide in 2019 turning into a Labour landslide in 2024. However, despite only increasing their vote share by 1.6% to a total of 33.7%, the Labour Party won a landslide of 411 seats, or 63% of all the seats available, and a 174-seat majority. The election was the least proportional since elections began in the UK, showing the influence of first-past-the-post voting system and how Labour won their votes in the right places. The Conservative Party had its worst result in its parliamentary history, winning just a measly 121 seats with 23.7% of the vote. The party's 2019 gains in the north were almost entirely reversed, whilst they also lost many of their traditional heartland seats in the south-east to the Liberal Democrats. Minor parties also increased their vote share significantly, from 12.7% in 2019 to 30.4% of the vote in 2024. However, due to first-past-the-post, they were still greatly underrepresented in terms of seats, with the Tories, Lib Dems and Labour winning 93% of all the seats available. Turnout was 7.4% lower than it was in 2019, with just 59.9% of those eligible to vote actually taking place in voting. Potential reasons for this could be a general distrust in politics, apathy as the policies of the main parties were very similar, and a belief that people's votes wouldn't matter as a Labour majority was clear from the onset. So, some key factors in determining the outcome of the 2024 election. The campaign itself. Though Labour's larger majority was clear in the polling prior to the election being called, this didn't change through the 6-week campaign. The campaign had a significant impact on the result in many ways. The most significant change in the campaign was the rise in support for Reform UK, who rose from just over 10% in the polls at the start of the campaign to up to 14% at the time of the vote on the 4th of July. Particularly important to this jump was the announcement in the beginning of June that Nigel Farage would be returning to the party and would stand as a potential MP in Clacton. By splitting the right-wing vote, Reform stopped the Conservatives from winning a larger potential number of seats. And in terms of competent trust and leadership, this is without a doubt the most important factor in Labour's landslide victory, and the huge drop-off in vote share for the Tories was the Conservative government's disastrous performance in office since the 2019 election. The public viewed the Conservatives as incompetent, untrustworthy, and deeply disliked Sunak personally as a leader. Following the 2019 election, the Conservative Party was dominant, and Boris Johnson seemed set for at least a decade in power and very much emulating what Margaret Thatcher managed to achieve. However, a large number of scandals halved their support by the time of the 2024 election. These scandals not only undermined trust in the party and government, which the public viewed as corrupt and self-serving, but also wrecked the party's reputation for competent economic management. The Labour Party's huge victory wasn't built on a major popular support for their policies or leader. Instead, they were successful due to this public's strong desire to get the Tories out. And next, the relative unimportance of policy and the manifestos. There was differences in policy between the parties. However, these differences were less marked than in previous elections, and the focus of the election and voting behaviour was less on policy than it was on the government's record. The Labour Party moved significantly towards the centre since the 2019 election, and was very careful in selecting differences in policy from the Conservative Party. In many areas, however, they were similar. They both promised to increase defence spending to 2.5%, and they both promised not to raise income tax, national insurance or corporation tax, and they both promised to invest heavily in the NHS. Rational choice voting. It is clear that rational choice voting played some role in how people voted in the 2024 election, in particular based on home ownership. Around 40% of those in mortgages, privately renting or socially renting, voted for Labour, reflecting the fact that Labour promised to improve rental conditions and mortgage rates increased significantly under the Conservatives. By contrast, however, just 25% of those who owned their homes outright voted for Labour Party. The lack of difference in taxation policies between the major parties meant that there was little rational choice between voting based on income in comparison to the 2019 election. And the media? YouGov polling reveals that while new mediums such as social media and podcasting are growing, Newspapers, televisions and the radio remain an important source of news for a lot of voters. Though print newspaper has declined, their websites do receive a lot of online traffic. There are some general differences, however, with the majority of those under 50 accessing news through social media, Facebook being the most important of these, with 69% of voters using it regularly. Labour also received endorsements from significantly more of the press than they did in 2019, with traditionally centrist and right-wing papers backing them, including The Sun, The Sunday Times and The Financial Times. As with previous elections, it seems that the television debates had very little impact. And then some social factors. Age was once more an important determinant of how people voted in the 2024 election. Older voters were far more likely to vote Conservative and Reform than younger voters, who were more likely to vote Labour, the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats. Gender and class continue to be largely irrelevant in determining voting behaviour, apart from the fact that those from C2 and DE were more likely to vote Reform than those from upper and middle classes, as was the case for men compared to women. Education levels were once more important determining in voting behaviour. Those with high levels of education were again more likely to vote Labour or Liberal Democrats, whilst those with lower levels of education were more likely to vote for Reform or the Conservatives. So finally then, just summarising some key points here. The Conservative government's incompetence and self-serving nature since the 2019 election was the most important factor in the result. It led to a dislike of the leader Sunak and a strong public desire to kick the Tories out of government. The campaign played an important role, in particular with the growth and support for Reform UK due to Farage becoming the leader, which further damaged the Tories. Policy was largely unimportant due to few actual significant policy differences. Tactical voting hurt the Tories and helped Labour and the Liberal Democrats significantly, and age and education levels continue to be important social factors. So next then, let's look at the influence of the media, which is point 4.2 of the specification. So, different types of media, starting with the press. This is the oldest form of media is newspapers, which used to be how the majority of people consume politics, but has declined in importance in recent decades due to the increasing importance of digital and online media. Other forms of media, newspapers have Unlike other forms of media, newspapers have no obligation to be neutral and have different political biases. Overall, there is a right-wing bias across British press. The Sun, the Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail and the Daily Express are more right-wing and support the Conservatives, whilst only the Daily Mirror and Guardian support the Labour, with the Financial Times and the Independent being somewhere in the middle. Around 7 million people read newspapers daily in the UK, which is a key source of political information and news, particularly for older voters who are more likely to vote. Further, many people read newspapers online, and newspaper journalists are highly important in political coverage on the television, radio and social media. As a newspaper presents a biased view, newspapers can be seen to have a big impact on changing people's opinions and influencing how they vote. The Conservatives have won the last 4 elections and have done so with the support of majority of until 2024, the Conservatives have won the last 4 elections and have done so with the support of the majority of the press. Newspaper circulation has declined significantly in recent years, as many voters have moved to other forms of media. In 2024, the Daily Mail had a circulation of 736,000 compared to 1.85 million in 2012 and 2.4 million in 1997. It seems unlikely that the influence of the press causes people to change their voting behaviour, however, and it's best to be sceptical about claims that newspapers have decided the outcome of elections. In fact, most people actually just read papers which broadly reflect their already set in stone beliefs and outlooks, so papers usually just confirm their readers' already existing political views. So then, the press in the 2024 election. The Labour Party received endorsements from significantly more of the press than they did in the 2019 election, with traditionally centrist and right-wing papers backing them, including The Sun, The Sunday Times and The Financial Times. That being said, the Conservative Party retained the backing of a number of right-wing papers with significant readerships, which includes The Telegraph and the Daily Mail. And here you can just have some snippets I've grabbed off a Wikipedia, which shows how each of the major papers in the 2024 election and which party they backed, if any at all. So, television and radio. Many people consume political news through television and the radio. For most channels, and particularly the BBC, politics coverage is supposed to be balanced and neutral. More recently, there's been a growth of other TV channels and radio stations which are biased, such as LBC, GB News and Talk TV and Radio. Television is important in the media coverage of elections, with television debates and interviews being an important fixture in campaigns and political broadcasts. Parties are allocated agreed amounts of airtime for their election broadcasts based on their voting share in the last election and the number of constituencies they're contesting. Television can be seen as important in how it projects visual images, helping voters to form an impression of party leaders. For example, a lot of the negative coverage of Jeremy Corbyn had focused on his scruffy appearance rather than his policies. Television debates and interviews can be seen as important in election times in shaping the views of voters. This is also true for younger voters who primarily use social media, as clips are often shared and can go viral. Between elections, television and radio interviews with key politicians can be highly important in holding them to account and shaping, again, the views of voters. Newsnight, for example, often exposes governments or opposition failures, such as how COVID was transmitted to care homes and of the anti-Semitism row in the Labour Party under Corbyn. A survey in the run-up to the 2024 election revealed that 58% of Britons access news through television and 42% through radio, compared to 43% through social media and 42% through newspapers, websites or their apps. So a particular example then is ITV's reporting of the post office scandal, which forced politicians to address it. The Post Office Horizon scandal, which received significant public attention in 2024, showed the crucial role of the media in influencing public opinion and holding politicians accountable between elections. The scandal, which involved wrongful convictions of numerous post office operators based on a flawed software, had received limited coverage until it surfaced and was thrust into the limelight by a compelling ITV documentary and subsequent detailed investigations by BBC Newsnight. It had received previous attention and there was an ongoing public inquiry since 2020, but it was the media and consequent public pressure that really created the need for change. The media spotlight escalated public awareness and concern, which in turn pressured politicians to take action. The result of the programme, the government announced an improved compensation scheme for the wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters. This included not only compensation for the financial loss suffered, but also for the personal distress and reputational damage. A number of postmasters launched successful appeals against their convictions, which saw many of them being overturned. The government pursued a full public inquiry and set up the Post Office Horizon Committee to do so. This shows how investigative journalism and media coverage are pivotal in holding politicians to account and representing minorities and underrepresented groups between elections, therefore being very important to democracy. So then, next we're going to look at social media and the internet. By 2015, social media began to play an important role in politics and elections, especially with parties learning from the success of Barack Obama's 2012 presidential election. For example, in 2015, the Conservatives reportedly spent £100,000 a month on Facebook advertising alone. Social media and the internet aren't subject to the same neutrality rules as television and the radio and can be seen as being highly partisan, with news sites such as Novara Media and The Spectator gaining significant traction. In the 2019 and 2024 election, the Conservative Party even rebranded their Twitter account during television debates to pretend to be independent fact-checkers. Online advertising on social media is a problem, as it is difficult to track where money is being spent and whether it is within the legal limits, especially targeted advertising. It's also easy for non-party supporters to spend a great deal without declaring. Parties can run political adverts all the time on social media, including on election day, which they are unable to do so on radio and television. In the 2024 election, over £1 million was spent on Google and Meta ads alone on the election day. So, specifically, how important is the media and social media is the internet and social media in politics? The internet and social media are central to how young voters consume political information and shape their political views. Parties and MPs focus a great deal on trying to influence the views of voters on social media. Polling by YouGov prior to the 2024 election found that 43% of Britons use social media as a source of news, and that a majority of those under 50 access news through social media, and as already mentioned, Facebook being the most important of these. They can also lead to certain scandals going viral during elections. For example, in 2019, significant viral events where Jacob Rees-Mogg made comments on the Grenfell fire, which were condemned by coverage of a boy with pneumonia who had to sleep on the floor in the hospital. That being said, however, the Conservatives did still comfortably win this election. Targeted advertising on social media is highly important to how parties try to reach specific groups of voters who they believe may switch to support for them. Spending on digital advertising in the 2024 election was higher than in any previous election. This shows not only the importance parties place in social media and advertising, but also reflects the fact that the Elections Bill, which received royal assent on April 28, 2024, increased previous spending limits by 80%, enabling both Labour and the Conservatives to allocate significantly more resources towards sophisticated campaign strategies, including targeting social media advertising. A lot of the political coverage on social media and the internet is however dominated by traditional forms of media, with journalists using Twitter in particular to report political news and many print newspapers having popular online websites and social media pages. These considerations don't apply to older generations who are much more likely to vote than younger people and continue to derive their news from press and the television. So next then, opinion polls. Opinion polls run by firms such as Ipsos Mori and YouGov aim to gauge the popularity of parties by asking a sample of people how they intend to vote. They also ask the public more detailed questions about their opinion of the party leaders and specific policies. They've become an integral part of election campaigns, with parties looking at their findings and also conducting their own polls with these polling firms. Parties also use opinion polling to shape their policies by gauging the popularity of different policies. Focus groups are also important in this. Exit polls are also the first indication of election results. In 1992, however, opinion polls failed to predict Major's narrow victory. Instead, the majority of the polls predicted either a narrow Labour victory or a hung parliament. The exit poll was even wrong that year, predicting a hung parliament. They are also wrong again in 2015. They predicted Labour being wiped out by the SNP in 2015, and also predicted Labour and the Conservatives would both have about 34% of the vote in England. In reality, the Conservatives had 36.9% and Labour 30.4%. An inquiry found the polling firms had not surveyed a representative selection of the nation's voters, and not interviewing enough retired people, and in interviewing many politically engaged young people who were atypical for their age. In both 2019 and 2024, polling was largely accurate, with most polls predicting a sizable Tory majority in 2019 and a significant Labour landslide in 2024. On the one hand, it can be argued that polling isn't very significant and simply reflects and shows the views of the public. Further, it can be argued that the general public pays little attention to opinion polling. However, on the other hand, opinion polls can be argued to have influenced elections by influencing turnout and voting behaviour, particularly tactical voting. Turnout is more likely to be high if opinion polls indicate that the election will be close. If an election seems decided, many people may be convinced not to vote, or that their protest vote is going to not affect the election. Opinion polls can influence tactical votes by giving voters an indication of who is likely to win, both nationally and in their area. So, some overall debates. How much impact does the media have during elections? And specifically, arguments for the media having a big impact on elections. Parties try to control their media appearance as much as possible during elections, sometimes avoiding tough interviews, and have very stage-managed performances and photo opportunities. During elections, most newspapers come out strongly in favour of a political party and effectively campaign for one party. Television debates and interviews are key moments in campaigns and are watched by millions of voters. And arguments that the media has little impact on elections is that the impact of the media during elections can, however, be overstated. Voters don't simply follow what the media says, but they form their own opinions. Further, most individuals consume the media and political opinions they already agree with, therefore only reinforcing views rather than having much potential to change them. This is especially true of social media. Other factors, including social media and balanced voters, can be seen as much more important. How important is the media in holding the government to account between elections? So, some arguments that the media is important in holding the government to account is the media plays a key role in holding the government to account and exposing its failures between elections. The media was crucial in exposing the Partygate scandal through receiving leaks and exposing different parts of the story gradually in order to maximise damage to the government and expose them for misleading Parliament. This was crucial in bringing down the Johnson government. Ministers are also often interviewed on the radio and television daily, where journalists can question them and expose their failings. This was especially true of Johnson's government, where ministers were asked to defend the indefensible. A key example of this is Labour being accused of cronyism due to Lord Ali and Freebiegate. In the summer of 2024, the UK Labour government was involved in a significant controversy involving prominent donor Lord Wahid Ali, who himself is a media entrepreneur and Labour peer who has donated over £500,000 to the party since 2020. The scandal, which was dubbed Freebie Gate and Passes for Glasses, revealed that Starmer had accepted significant gifts from Ali, including clothing and designer eyewear, which was totally valued at over £16,000, and some of which was not properly declared. This was particularly controversial as following Labour's electoral victory in July 2024, unelected Ali was granted a temporary security pass to Downing Street, which he used to organise a post-election event and reportedly advised on public appointments. These revelations led to allegations of cronyism, undermining public trust in politicians and reinforcing perceptions of a democratic deficit, where those with money can influence politics despite themselves being unelected. And some arguments that the media isn't important in holding the government to account between elections is that Parliament can be seen as playing a far more important role in holding the government account, whilst the media often provides a platform for politicians to scrutinise other politicians. There have been allegations of bias against the BBC from both sides of the political spectrum, with Laura Cusenberg in particular being accused of spreading fake news, including a false story about Labour activists pursuing a Conservative Party advisor. Much of the population pays little attention to politics and political media, especially outside of elections. Seeking to control the news agenda is far as possible peaked under New Labour, with the term spin doctor was coined. Blair recruited Press Secretary Alistair Campbell, who was the political editor of the Today newspaper at the time. Blair's government developed a so-called grid of forthcoming events so that news announcements could be made around them, presenting the government in the best possible light. So some arguments the media has a positive impact on democracy and politics. So the arguments that the media has a positive impact is that a free media is vital for the health of democracy and can play an essential role in holding governments to account and highlighting key political failures, especially when parliamentary opposition is weak, and television and radio coverage is less biased than newspapers. The BBC Charter insists upon political neutrality, and this is by and large followed by many other channels. And some arguments that the media has a negative impact. Large sections of the media present an oversimplified interpretation of political issues and focuses too much on leaders, personalities and images rather than on policy. This is influenced by the fact that they are driven by getting as many clicks and advertising revenue as possible. Newspapers are notoriously partisan and will alter their allegiance in response to changing circumstances as much as to any ideological loyalties. Newspaper owners and other important media figures are primarily interested in boosting their circulation figures and can't be held to account in the same way politicians can. So then just a few examples. Examples to suggest that the media has had a positive impact on democracy. In March 2023, The Telegraph published over 100,000 leaked WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock, who was a former UK Health Secretary, which revealed details about the government's handling of the COVID pandemic. These messages, given to The Telegraph by journalist Isabel Oakeshott, exposed several controversial decisions and discussions within the government, including the suggestion that face masks were mandated in schools and not based on public health advice, but rather to avoid political disagreements with Scottish authorities. The Telegraph's decision to publish these messages demonstrates the right-wing media can act independently of the government, prioritising public interest and journalist integrity over political allegiance. And some examples that the media has had a negative impact on democracy. Firstly, Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, or X, was criticised in late 2024 for spreading misinformation and hate against the Labour government and Home Office Minister, Jess Phillips in particular. The tech billionaire labelled Phillips an evil witch and a rape genocide apologist, calling for her to be jailed. This was due to a dispute over historic grooming cases and Musk's calls for a national inquiry, despite his limited knowledge of the issue. This shows the danger of social media to democracy, as it can be used by foreign actors and spread disinformation, which is dangerous to MPs and the health of democracy. This is particularly stark given the fact that 2 MPs have been killed by their constituents in the past decade alone. And The Guardian reported in February 2024 that Rupert Murdoch, a media tycoon who controls a vast empire including outlets such as The Times, The Sun and the Sky News in the UK, met with Sunak 5 times over a 12-month period spanning from early 2022 to early 2023. Such frequent interactions underscore the significant power Murdoch wields within the political landscape, with politicians seeking his favour in order to secure favourable media coverage from his media outlets. Prior to the 1997 election, Blair flew out to Murdoch's private island off the coast of Australia. His papers then backed Blair and Labour in the election. This shows the great power that the unelected, unaccountable media moguls and newspaper barons and tycoons have in British politics, and how politicians see them as a key to winning elections and remaining popular. This undermines democracy significantly and shows a great deal of power is concentrated in the hands of a few who can shape the narrative and sway public opinion through their publications. So that is it. So here's just again a quick look at the specification, and you can see that we've covered everything here. So thank you very much everyone for watching. As mentioned, this is the fourth part in a series of 4 covering everything you need to know for the UK politics section of paper 1. So if you're studying A-Level Edexcel Politics, check out those videos, and I'll be releasing videos in the future for everything for paper 2 and paper 3. Also, if you're studying A-Level AQA Philosophy or Edexcel History, I've also got videos out on those subjects, so please check that out. So again, thank you very much for watching.